The company's branch office had always been a place where people tried to stay out of trouble. Most of the staff worked quietly, kept their heads down, and avoided doing anything that might attract the wrong kind of attention. So when word came that the CEO was visiting for a morale event, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone tried to look busy, look confident, look cheerful, basically anything that would make them seem like a model employee. But beneath all the smiling faces, people were nervous. The CEO wasn't known for being gentle. He liked to joke around, but his jokes often had a sharp edge. Most people laughed because they felt they had to, not because they found anything funny. His visits were like surprise inspections, wrapped in a thin layer of humor. The branch's break area had been quickly transformed into a makeshift stage, with chairs pushed to the side, a banner on the wall, and snacks on a table. Someone thought it would make the place feel more welcoming, though no one felt more relaxed. And in the corner, half hidden by a stack of storage boxes, sat an old wooden piano. No one remembered who brought it in or why it was still there. Dust lined the keys, and one leg was held together with tape. The CEO walked in with a wide smile, greeting people loudly like he was the most beloved person in the room. The staff clapped politely. Some looked thrilled. Some looked terrified. A few exchanged glances, silently hoping nothing embarrassing would happen. After a bit of talking, the CEO moved around the room, joking with people and pointing out little things he found amusing. That was when he noticed the piano. He paused, tilted his head, and laughed. "What is this doing here?" he asked with a dramatic gesture. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Most shrugged. No one wanted to be the one to answer. The CEO stepped closer, tapped one of the keys, and the piano made a dull sound. "This thing has seen better days," he said. Then he looked around, eyes scanning the room as if searching for a target, and that was when his gaze landed on a quiet employee standing off to the side. This employee was someone most people barely noticed. They always showed up on time, always finished their tasks, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Not shy, not unfriendly, just someone who moved through the day without drawing any attention. A background presence. The kind of worker no one had complaints about, but also rarely thought about. The CEO smiled in a way that made a few people uneasy. "Hey," he called out, pointing at the employee. "You look like someone who's got some hidden talents. Ever play the piano?" A small wave of laughter spread through the crowd. The employee didn't laugh. They simply looked at the CEO, calm and steady. That only made the CEO lean in further. "Tell you what," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, his tone carrying that mix of teasing and superiority he often used. "I'll make you CEO for a day if you can play something impressive." "How's that?" The room burst into louder laughter this time, not because it was genuinely funny, but because people felt pressured to react. A few people covered their mouths, unsure if laughing was the right thing to do. Others laughed too loudly, as if hoping their enthusiasm would make them safe from becoming the next target. The employee stayed still. For a moment, it looked like they might just smile politely and shake their head. That was what the CEO expected. That was what everyone expected. It was just a joke, after all. A little moment meant to break the tension and remind everyone who had the most power in the room. But instead of stepping back or shrugging off the comment, the employee looked at the piano for a long, thoughtful moment. The crowd's laughter slowly faded. People leaned in slightly, sensing something unusual. The employee's expression didn't change much, but there was something in their eyes, a kind of quiet decision forming. They began walking toward the piano. A ripple moved through the room. People glanced at each other, confused. The CEO raised an eyebrow, amused but also surprised. He hadn't expected someone to actually respond to his teasing, especially not like this. The employee moved calmly, not rushing, not hesitating. Their steps were steady, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. The room felt suddenly quieter, even though no one had spoken yet. Someone whispered, "Are they really going to play it?" Another whispered back, "Maybe they just want to look at it." Nobody knew the truth. The employee never talked about their past or hobbies. They never boasted, never hinted at anything special. To most people, they were just another person in the office, reliable, quiet, hard-working. The CEO folded his arms, half smiling. "Well, look at that," he said to the people closest to him. Didn't think they'd take the challenge seriously. But behind his smile, there was a flicker of uncertainty. He hadn't considered the possibility that someone might try to prove him wrong. The employee reached the piano and brushed a bit of dust off the edge. Their fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. Some in the crowd held their breath without meaning to. The room had shifted from light mockery to genuine curiosity. The CEO stepped closer, trying to keep the mood playful. "No pressure," he said with a laugh. "Just the whole room watching you." A few people chuckled, but it was a thin sound, unsure, constrained. The earlier laughter had faded completely, replaced by a strange mix of suspense and disbelief. The employee gently pressed one key. It made a low, almost tired sound. Then they tried another, and another. The piano wasn't in great shape, but the employee didn't seem bothered. Their face stayed calm, almost peaceful. It was at that moment that people noticed something different. The way the employee's posture changed ever so slightly, almost like they were settling into an old habit. Their shoulders relaxed. Their hands rested over the keys in a way that wasn't awkward at all. It was natural, familiar, comfortable. Someone in the back murmured, "They've done this before." But no one knew for sure. The CEO, now curious himself, tilted his head. The playful smirk was still there, but it wasn't as confident as before. "Well?" he said lightly. "Let's hear something." The employee didn't respond. They took a slow breath, their fingers poised. The room felt like it was holding still, waiting for something to happen. And then, without announcing it, without any dramatic gesture, the employee began to play. The first few notes were soft, testing, like they were getting a feel for how the old piano responded. The sound wasn't perfect. Some keys were slightly off, others too sharp, but the melody forming beneath their hands had a shape, a life, a flow. The crowd's murmurs dissolved. The laughter was long gone. People leaned in instinctively, eyes wide. It was suddenly impossible to look away. The employee continued, the melody growing steadier, more confident. Each movement of their hands looked practiced, familiar, almost effortless. The sound filled the room in a way no one expected. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was emotional, smooth, the kind of music that made people quiet without realizing it. The CEO's smile faded little by little. He looked around, noticing the stunned expressions on the faces of his employees. He tried to adjust his expression, but the surprise was too obvious. The employee's fingers flowed across the keys with a grace no one in that room had imagined. The old piano, battered and dusty, came alive in their hands. It didn't matter that it wasn't in great condition. The emotion in the music made people forget everything else. A few staff members exchanged glances filled with disbelief. Others stared at the employee like they were seeing them for the first time. Someone whispered, "How did we never know they could do this?" Another whispered back, I don't think anyone knew." The CEO stood utterly still, trying to look amused, but his face showed something else, shock mixed with embarrassment. He had meant the challenge as a joke, a light-hearted moment where he got to be the charming leader teasing an employee. Instead, the situation was turning into something he didn't control. The music continued, richer, deeper, more expressive. What started as a moment meant for laughter had turned into something powerful. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the piano. And in that silence, people realized something this wasn't. Just a random employee playing a dusty old piano. This was someone, revealing a part of themselves no one had ever taken the time to see. The CEO finally shifted his weight, his arms lowering slightly. His earlier confidence had slipped away. His eyes followed the employee's hands as if he were trying to understand how the situation had gone from a casual joke to something that made him feel exposed. And the employee, still calm, still focused, played on, completely unaware or unconcerned with the tension building behind them. The moment wasn't dramatic in a loud way. It was quiet, steady, surprising. The kind of moment where everything in the room changed. Without anyone shouting or moving, people watching knew they would talk about this for a long time. And the CEO slowly realized that the joke he'd made so casually, "I'll make you CEO if you can play something impressive," was no longer funny. What was happening in front of him was more impressive than anything he had expected. And the story had only just begun. The moment the employee began to play, something shifted in the room that no one could fully explain. People had expected a few uneven notes, maybe a short, awkward attempt, followed by nervous laughter, and the CEO brushing it off as a harmless joke. Within seconds, it became clear this wasn't going to be anything like that. The melody grew smoother, stronger. The old piano, despite its worn keys and tired soundboard, responded to the employee's touch as if it had been waiting years to be played like this. Each note blended into the next with surprising ease, creating a soft but emotional wave of sound that wrapped around the room. No one spoke. No one even moved. All the small sounds of the branch, the clicking of pens, the tapping of shoes, quiet sighs of people trying to look busy faded into nothing. It was as if everyone forgot where they were. The employee didn't look nervous. Their shoulders were relaxed, their face calm. They played with a quiet confidence that didn't feel showy or proud. It felt natural, like breathing. Something they had done many times long before this day. A few people in the front row leaned forward slightly, trying to see the employee's hands better. Someone whispered that the way their fingers moved didn't look like beginner skill. It looked practiced, trained, maybe even professional. But how had no one ever noticed? How had someone with talent like this stayed hidden for so long? The CEO, who had been standing not far from the piano, shifted uncomfortably. He tried to look amused, as if this was all part of the fun, but his expression wasn't convincing. The teasing smirk he started with had slowly faded into confusion, then mild worry. Now he simply watched, unsure how to react. He hadn't meant anything serious when he made that joke. It was just another one of those playful comments people expected him to make during visits. He liked to be the center of attention, and most of the time, people laughed along to keep things smooth. So he hadn't expected the challenge to be taken literally. And he certainly hadn't expected to be upstaged by someone he barely noticed. The employee kept playing, the music building into something more complex. The melody rose and fell in a way that pulled at people's emotions without asking permission. Some of the staff felt something in their chest they didn't know how to describe. It wasn't sadness or joy. It was something in between, something they hadn't expected to feel during a company gathering. A few people looked at each other with wide eyes. A few others simply stared, completely absorbed. The performance didn't feel like it belonged in a break room surrounded by paper cups, half-empty coffee pots, and stacks of office files. It felt like something that belonged on a stage. No one had ever seen the employee take center stage in anything before. They were the type who blended into the background, always reliable, but never seeking attention. They helped others quietly, finished tasks without being reminded, and never complained. A good worker, but easy to overlook Dot. But now, with their hands moving across the keys, they didn't seem like the same quiet person everyone thought they knew. Something about the music revealed a deeper part of them, something that had been tucked away for a long time. Someone whispered, "Why didn't they ever tell anyone they could play?" Another whispered back, "Maybe no one ever asked." Employees' past had always been a mystery, mostly because they kept it private. People knew they showed up early, left quietly, and never shared much about their life outside of work. They were polite but distant, not cold, just careful. Someone who had learned the value of being unnoticed. But the way they played the piano told a different story. It suggested years of practice, long hours of dedication, and maybe choices they once had to make, choices that steered them away from music and toward the life they had now. The CEO glanced toward the crowd, and the crowd glanced back at him. Some were smiling softly, others looked stunned, but the common expression was surprise. Everyone had underestimated someone who had been right in front of them the whole time. The CEO's face tightened. He couldn't joke his way out of this moment. The employee was doing something real, something meaningful, and it reflected back on him in a way he didn't like. Suddenly, his challenge didn't feel funny. It felt careless. The employee's hands moved faster now, weaving through a section of the melody that was more intense, more emotional. The room felt even smaller, as if the music was pressing gently against the walls. Someone near the back of the room blinked rapidly, feeling their eyes sting. They quickly rubbed at their face, embarrassed, but the feeling didn't go away. The music felt too honest, too raw, and it was coming from a person they had barely acknowledged for years. Another employee folded their arms, not in annoyance, but to steady themselves. They had never imagined the quietest person in the room carried something like this inside them. The melody slowed again, becoming soft and gentle, almost like a memory. The notes floated through the air, as if they were telling a story only the employee fully understood. And little by little, the crowd began to notice something else. The employee's expression wasn't simply calm. There was something distant in their eyes, like they weren't playing for the people watching, or even for the CEO who had mocked them. They were playing for themselves. It was as if the music was a place they hadn't visited in a long time. And now that they were finally back, everything around them faded away. The CEO swallowed hard. He stepped back a little, trying not to look. Rattled, he folded his arms, but then unfolded them again, unsure where to put his hands. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't the most important person in the room. The employee played on, and then something even stranger happened. People began remembering moments from the employee's time in the office, small things that suddenly made more sense. Someone recalled seeing a set of sheet music sticking out of their bag months ago, but thinking nothing of it. Another remembered how the employee always hummed softly when they thought no one could hear. Someone else remembered seeing them pause, once while walking past the old piano, looking at it with a strange expression. These memories seemed small at the time, but now they felt like clues everyone had overlooked. The employee added a delicate run of notes near the end of the melody, each one light and graceful. The room felt heavy, the silence almost too thick to break. Then, after one last soft chord, the employees slowly lifted their hands from the keys. The music faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above, but no one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because the moment felt too fragile to break. The performance didn't feel like a show. It felt like witnessing someone open a door to a part of themselves they had kept locked for years. The employees sat still for a moment, hands resting quietly in their lap. They didn't look proud or embarrassed, just thoughtful. The CEO finally tried to speak, but his voice caught slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. Well, that was unexpected. It wasn't the reaction the room wanted to hear. The words felt too small, too weak compared to what had just happened. Someone in the crowd frowned slightly. Another bit their lip, disappointed. The employee stood from the piano, turning back toward the room. Their expression remained calm, neither seeking approval nor dismissing it. They simply nodded politely, as if they had done nothing more dramatic than help someone carry a box. But the room still felt heavy with emotion. The CEO forced a smile. "Very impressive," he said, trying to sound in control again. "Really, very impressive. Didn't know we had a musician here." The employee didn't respond. They didn't need to. The staff began to clap, then soft at first, then louder, as people realized they weren't alone in how they felt. The applause wasn't the cheerful kind people used for presentations or office celebrations. It was something deeper, more meaningful. The employee didn't bow or try to take credit. They just stood quietly, accepting the moment with the same calmness they had shown the entire time. And as the applause echoed through the room, the CEO stood in place, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. The music had changed something in the room that no one could fully explain. It had shifted the way people saw the employee, the CEO, and even themselves. And although no one said it out loud, everyone knew the same thing. This was only the beginning of a story that none of them would forget. The room was still settling from the music when the employee stepped back from the piano, but the silence they left behind didn't fade easily. It lingered, stretching across the space like a soft echo. People stood in place, unsure of what to do next. Even the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if everyone had shared a moment they weren't prepared for. The CEO tried to recover his confidence, but something in his posture looked unsettled. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and forced a smile, but the expression sat awkwardly on his face. Usually, he controlled the mood of the room. Today, the mood had taken control of him. A few employees exchanged glances. Some looked amazed. Others looked thoughtful. No one fully understood what had just happened, but everyone sensed it was important. The employee quietly stepped away from the piano and moved toward the side of the room. They didn't look uncomfortable, though they weren't used to this kind of attention. Their expressions stayed calm, almost peaceful. They weren't seeking praise or waiting for reactions. It was as if the performance had been something they needed to release, not something they needed approval for. Someone finally approached them, a coworker who usually kept to themselves. "That was unbelievable," they said softly. The employee gave a small nod, not bragging, not dismissing it, just acknowledging. Another coworker walked up. "How long have you been able to do that?" they asked. The employee shrugged lightly. "A long time." Their voice was calm, quiet, and didn't invite more questions. But people had plenty of them anyway. The performance had opened a door, and now everyone wanted to peek inside. The CEO, seeing the attention shift away from him, stepped forward again. He tried to regain control of the atmosphere by letting out a loud laugh. "Well," he said, "that was certainly a surprise. Didn't expect our quiet one here to have such hidden skills." His tone was light, but it didn't land the way he wanted. The crowd didn't laugh with him. They weren't in the mood for jokes. The moment still felt too meaningful. He noticed their reaction and awkwardly clapped his hands together. All right, he said. "Let's get back to the event, shall we?" But no one moved. The piano had changed everything, and people weren't ready to pretend nothing happened. The CEO's forced enthusiasm faded again. He shifted his weight and looked at the employee, trying to decide how to respond now that the attention was no longer his to control. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, trying to sound genuinely curious. The employee hesitated for the first time since the performance ended. They didn't seem eager to talk about themselves. But after a moment, they answered simply, "Home." That one word carried more weight than the CEO expected. It made him pause. Before he could ask more, someone from the back stepped forward. "Have you ever played on stage?" they asked. The employees shook their head. "Not for a long time." Their voice remained steady, but there was something behind the words, something quiet, something private. The crowd picked up on it. Some people wondered what had happened to keep someone with so much skill away from something they clearly loved, but no one asked out loud. The CEO looked around, noticing how the room was still wrapped in the moment. He seemed to realize that no amount of jokes or loud talking would undo what had happened. The employee had shown a side of themselves that demanded respect, and the CEO could feel the difference in how people were looking at him now. He didn't like the feeling. To regain some comfort, he walked toward the employee, smiling in a stiff way. "Well," he said, "I must admit, that was impressive. Truly. Didn't think you had something like that in you." The words were meant to sound flattering, but they came out sounding more like a confession one he didn't intend to reveal. The employee simply nodded again. They weren't interested in making the CEO feel better or worse. They just stood quietly, letting the moment pass. People slowly began to move, forming small groups and whispering among themselves. The piano performance was all anyone could talk about. But the more they talked, the more another question grew in their minds. Why had someone with so much talent never shared it? Some people tried to guess. Maybe the employee had stopped playing because life got in the way. Maybe responsibilities took over. Maybe they had gone through something that changed their path. Maybe music used to be their dream, but dreams didn't always survive real life. A few wondered if the employee had stepped away from music because they no longer believed in themselves. But whatever the reason, something felt clear: the piano was not just a hobby. It was a part of their history, one that had been put aside for reasons unknown. The CEO eventually tried to continue the event. He gave a few announcements and tried to lighten the mood, but the words didn't land the way he wanted. People listened, but their attention felt distant. They were still thinking about the employee. He finished his speech, though it was shorter than planned. His usual confidence seemed dimmer. Even he could feel the shift in the room's energy. When he wrapped up, employees began returning to their desks, though many walked more slowly than usual. Still processing everything. The employee didn't rush back to work. They stood near the piano for a little longer, gently wiping away dust from the keys with the sleeve of their shirt. They touched the piano like it was something familiar, something safe, something they missed. A coworker approached timidly. "That song you played, was it something you wrote?" The employee paused. Then they nodded. The coworker smiled softly. "It was beautiful." The employee didn't respond right away. They looked down at the piano keys, like they were seeing memories instead of chipped wood. "Thank you," they finally said. The coworker left, and the employee stood there for a moment longer, staring at the instrument with a mixture of warmth and sadness. It felt like the piano had opened a door they'd kept closed for many years. Part of them wasn't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing. When they finally stepped away from it, they left behind a silence that felt full, not empty. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside the break area, a group of employees whispered among themselves. "Did you see the CEO's face?" One said, "He wasn't expecting that at all." Another replied, "He looked embarrassed." They weren't gossiping out of malice. They were simply surprised. The CEO was used to being in control of every room he entered. Today, he'd been overshadowed by someone who didn't even try. A soft laugh escaped someone. He basically challenged a piano player without knowing it. Someone else added, "I don't think he likes being surprised like that." Another voice chimed in, quiet but thoughtful. Maybe he needed it. The conversation drifted as people returned to their work, but the feeling stayed back in the break room. The CEO lingered for a moment, looking at the piano as if it were an opponent he hadn't expected to lose to. He quietly muttered to himself, "CEO for a day. What was I thinking?" It was clear he wished he hadn't joked so carelessly, especially not in front of a crowd, especially not before realizing the talent he was mocking. He shook his head and left the room. Across the office, the employee returned to their desk. Their coworkers glanced at them with a new kind of respect. Some offered small smiles. Others just watched quietly, still unsure what to say. The employee didn't react much. They simply sat down, pulled a document toward them, and continued their work as if nothing unusual had happened. But their hands trembled slightly, not from fear or embarrassment, more from the weight of memories that the piano had stirred awake. They took a slow breath, grounding themselves. For the rest of the afternoon, people continued whispering. A few tried to approach the employee, but most held back, unsure if it was the right time. The piano remained in the corner of the break room, but now it felt different. Before today, it was a dusty object no one cared about. Now it carried a story. A quiet coworker passed by the employee's desk and paused. "If you ever feel like playing again," they said gently, "I think a lot of us would love to hear it." The employee gave a small, thoughtful smile. Maybe. It wasn't a promise, just a possibility, but even that felt like something. The rest of the day passed slowly, with people replaying the melody in their minds. Some hummed it softly without realizing. Others tapped the rhythm on their desks. The performance had left an imprint on the entire office as the sun lowered behind the building, and employees began packing up to head home. The employees sat quietly, deep in thought. They hadn't expected the day to unfold like this. They hadn't planned to play, and they certainly hadn't expected their old life to resurface in front of everyone. But something about the moment felt right. Like the music they had buried long ago had finally found a way back to them, and they couldn't help wondering what would happen next. The room had gone quiet after the performance, and even hours later, the tension still hung in the air. People from the company whispered about what had happened in the lobby, about how the CEO's joke turned into something completely different. But the person who felt the pressure the most was the one who had stood at the piano, unsure if he had made things better or worse for himself. Now, as the sun dipped behind the tall office buildings outside, he sat on a bench near the company's small courtyard, feeling the weight of every moment replaying in his mind. He didn't know whether the CEO was angry, impressed, confused, or all of those things at once. It was hard to read someone who usually kept his power like a shield. The only thing he knew was what he had seen in the CEO's eyes for a brief second, a flash of something human, something real, something that didn't match the cold mask he normally wore. A soft breeze brushed through the courtyard trees, carrying the faint noise of traffic beyond the wall. He leaned back, letting the quiet settle over him. After such a chaotic moment, this silence felt almost unreal. He wondered if tomorrow would change everything or change nothing at all. Maybe the CEO would forget the whole thing. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe the performance had awakened an old memory. Maybe it had annoyed him. There were too many possibilities, and none of them felt solid. As he sat there thinking, he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway that led into the courtyard. He didn't look right away. He half expected it to be a security guard, telling him the courtyard was closed, or someone who wanted to talk about what everyone was buzzing about. When the footsteps stopped near him, he finally lifted his head. It was the CEO. The CEO stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed but not casual. His expression wasn't strict, but it wasn't friendly either. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. For a long second, neither of them said anything. "You sit like someone waiting for a verdict," the CEO finally said. He tried to smile, but it came out uneven. "Maybe I am." The CEO stepped closer and sat on the other end of the bench. It surprised him. He had never seen the CEO sit anywhere outside a meeting room or office. The CEO looked around the courtyard, as if seeing it for the first time. "This place is quieter than I remember," the CEO said. He nodded, unsure what else to say. His heart beat faster, but he kept his breathing steady. The CEO turned his eyes toward him. "That performance earlier," the CEO said slowly, "wasn't what I expected." He swallowed. "I know. I wasn't trying to do anything dramatic or disrespectful. I just—" "You asked, and I played." The CEO raised an eyebrow. "Asked?" "Well, you said you'd make me CEO if I played," he said softly. "I know it was a joke, but it wasn't exactly a joke," the CEO interrupted. "More like a careless comment." He looked at the CEO, confused. A careless comment? That wasn't something he ever imagined the CEO admitting. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You played that piece like someone who wasn't trying to show off," the CEO continued. "You played like someone who just wanted to tell the truth." He blinked, not sure what that meant. "I didn't think of it that way. I just played the way I always do. It helps me stay grounded." The CEO nodded slowly. Grounded. Interesting word. Then he went quiet for a moment before saying, "You know, I haven't heard that piece in a long time." It surprised me. A question formed in his mind, but he hesitated. Finally, he asked gently, "Does it mean something to you?" The CEO looked away, almost like he didn't want to answer, but after a few seconds, he did. "Someone I knew used to play it. A long time ago." He didn't ask who. It felt too personal, and he sensed the CEO wouldn't answer even if he did. But something had definitely shifted. For once, the CEO wasn't talking from behind a wall of authority. He was speaking like a person. The CEO leaned back again. "You're not like most people here," he said. He felt his chest tighten. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" The CEO gave a small, tired smile. "Depends on the moment. Today? Maybe it was both." They sat in silence again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like the air between them had changed shape, becoming something neither of them had ever expected. He looked at the CEO, wondering what he was supposed to say or do next before he could think of anything. The CEO stood up. "Walk with me." He blinked. "Where?" "Just a walk. No formalities." He got up slowly and followed the CEO out of the courtyard. They walked through the quiet hallways, the lights dim since most employees had already gone home. Their footsteps echoed, and with each step he felt more uncertain about what was happening. The CEO wasn't someone who did random walks or conversations. Something had changed inside him, and he still didn't know whether he should be nervous or relieved. The CEO stopped near a window overlooking the city lights. "You know, people misunderstand leadership," he said. "They think it's all decisions and control. But sometimes leadership is about seeing something in someone that they don't see in themselves." He looked at the CEO carefully. "Is that what you see in me?" The CEO didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, the lights reflecting in his eyes. "I see someone who isn't afraid to be himself, even when he's unsure. Someone who doesn't perform for attention. Someone who doesn't bend just to make others comfortable." He paused. That's rare. The words felt unreal, almost too big to hold. He didn't know what to say. The CEO finally looked at him again. You didn't plan on impressing anyone today, did you? He shook his head. I didn't plan anything. I didn't think it would matter. I just reacted. Exactly, the CEO said. And sometimes that's the moment that shows someone's true character. He felt a strange mixture of warmth and confusion. I still don't know what this means for me. For anything. The CEO gave a small laugh, something he rarely did. Maybe it means nothing yet. Or maybe it means everything. Life doesn't always tell you the meaning right away. They continued walking slowly. As they turned the corner, they passed the lobby where everything had happened earlier. The piano still sat there quietly, the overhead lights glinting off its polished surface. He looked at it with a mix of pride and uncertainty. The CEO stopped again. You're wondering what happens next. He nodded. The CEO took a deep breath. I don't know yet. I'm not in the habit of rushing decisions, especially when they involve potential. The word potential hung in the air. He wasn't sure if he should feel hopeful. The CEO continued. I want to see what you do tomorrow. Not under pressure. Not reacting. Just being you. Show me who you are when no one is watching. He nodded slowly, taking the words in like they were heavier than they sounded. I can do that. Good, the CEO said. Then let's see where this goes. They returned to the lobby, and the CEO gave one last glance at the piano before walking away with a calm, unreadable expression. As the CEO disappeared down the hallway, he stood alone in the quiet space. The events of the day wrapped around him like a fog, shifting but impossible to hold tightly. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something inside him felt different, like a door had been opened, even if only a little. He walked toward the exit, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing. Everything had changed. The next morning came faster than he expected. He barely slept, not because he was afraid, but because his mind kept replaying everything the CEO had said. Every word felt like a puzzle piece he didn't know how to arrange. When he finally left his apartment, the sky was still a pale shade of early dawn, and the city hadn't fully woken up yet. As he walked toward the company building, he noticed how different everything felt. The same streets, the same crosswalk. Lights, the same tall structures, yet something inside him had shifted. It was like he was walking into a place he thought he knew, but was now seeing through a different lens. He reached the entrance earlier than usual, wanting a moment to breathe, before the day officially began. The lobby was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and distant voices from employees setting up for the day. The piano, sitting in the corner, caught a ray of morning sunlight, making its polished surface glow. He stared at it for a moment. Remembering the shock on everyone's faces the previous evening, part of him wanted to sit and play again, but another part held back. He didn't want it to look like he was trying too hard. The CEO's words echoed in his mind. Show me who. You are when no one is watching. But someone was always watching in a place like this. He walked past the piano and headed to his department. People gave him curious glances, some whispering as he passed. It wasn't the usual kind of attention. It felt heavier, like they were waiting to see what would happen next. He tried to ignore it and sat at his desk, turning on his computer. Few minutes later, one of his coworkers approached. She wasn't someone who usually talked to him much, but today her eyes were full of curiosity. So, what exactly happened with the CEO yesterday? She asked quietly. He sighed softly. Nothing dramatic. I just played the piano. That's all. That's not what I heard, she whispered. People said he actually stopped and listened. He never does that. And after that, both of you disappeared. He gave a small shrug. We talked. That's it. She raised an eyebrow like she didn't believe him. But before she could say anything else, their supervisor called her over. She mouthed, "You have to tell me everything later," before walking away. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the pressure building again. He didn't like being the center of attention, and suddenly he felt like every little thing he did was under a microscope. Hours passed slowly, and he tried to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept drifting. Every time footsteps approached, he wondered if it was the CEO. Every time the elevator chimed, his heart jumped. But the morning went on with no sign of him. By lunchtime, he was restless. He went to the small outdoor patio behind the building, where employees often ate or took breaks. The air was warm, and a soft wind rustled the plants along the edges of the space. He found a quiet corner and sat down with his lunch. As he ate, he tried to calm himself. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe the CEO didn't mean anything big by what he said. Maybe today would be normal after all. Just as that thought settled, he heard footsteps. He turned and saw the CEO walking toward him. For a moment, he felt his breath catch. The CEO wasn't alone this time. He carried a tablet, and he looked like he had been in several meetings already. Still, he paused when he reached the table. "Mind if I sit?" the CEO asked. He shook his head quickly. "No, not at all." The CEO sat opposite him. "I didn't see you in the morning." "I was at my desk," he replied. "I didn't want to bother you." "You wouldn't have been bothering me," the CEO said calmly. "I asked you to show me who you are today." He nodded. "I tried. I just didn't know what that meant." The CEO studied him for a moment. "Did you feel different today?" He thought about it. "Yes, everything felt louder. Like people were watching me." "That will happen," the CEO said. "When you stand out, people react. Sometimes in good ways, sometimes in confusing ones." He looked down at his lunch. Unsure what to say, the CEO leaned forward. "Tell me something. Why do you play the piano?" He took a breath. "It keeps me balanced. When things get too heavy or too busy, playing helps me breathe. It reminds me who I am." The CEO nodded, slowly, almost thoughtfully. "That's what I thought." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the CEO said, "you're grounded. Most people lose that when they enter a place like this. They let ambition or fear control them. But you haven't lost yourself." He didn't know how to respond. No one had ever described him like that before. The CEO set the tablet down. "I want you to come to a meeting with me this afternoon." His eyes widened. "A meeting? Why?" "To observe," the CEO said. "To learn. To understand the room. You don't have to say anything. Just watch." He blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "What kind of meeting?" "An internal strategy discussion," the CEO said. "I want to see how you process things, how you interpret situations." He hesitated. "I've never been in a room like that before." "That's exactly why you should be there." His hands felt slightly shaky, but he nodded. "Okay, I'll go." The CEO stood up. "Good. Come to the top floor at 2. Don't be late." After he walked away, the patio felt quieter than before. He couldn't believe what was happening. Him? In a meeting with senior leaders? It felt surreal. Back at his desk, he spent the next hour trying to calm himself. When the clock approached 2, he wiped his hands on his pants and took the elevator. To the top floor. The hallway there was silent, wide, and polished brighter than the rest of the building. He reached the meeting room. The CEO stood near the door, talking softly to another executive. When he saw him, he motioned for him to come inside. "Sit beside me," the CEO said. He did, feeling several pairs of eyes glance at him. The room filled quickly, and soon a dozen people sat around the long table. The meeting began at first. He felt overwhelmed. They discussed numbers, projections, challenges, and decisions that could shape the future of the company. Everyone spoke confidently, sometimes sharply. But as he watched and listened, something unexpected happened. He started noticing things. Not numbers or graphs, people, the way one person kept, cutting others off. The way another tried to speak, but hesitated each time. The way the CEO stayed calm, listening quietly, not reacting too fast, the way tension built and shifted like waves. He didn't know much about strategy, but he understood people. And this room was full of emotions hidden behind formal words. At one point, the CEO leaned closer. "What do you see?" He whispered. He whispered back. "Some people are saying a lot without saying anything." A corner of the CEO's mouth twitched. Interesting. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. When it ended, people filed out quickly, some still whispering about unfinished topics. The CEO stayed seated, waiting until the room was empty. Then he turned to him. "Tell me your thoughts." He hesitated, but the CEO nodded. ENCOURAGINGLY. So he spoke. He didn't talk about the numbers. He talked about what he saw, who listened, who didn't, who tried to speak up but couldn't, who seemed frustrated, who seemed confident, and how the conversation swayed because of unspoken moods. The CEO listened intently, not interrupting once. When he finished, the CEO leaned back in his chair. "You saw more than most people in that room." He swallowed. "I wasn't trying to be clever. I just noticed." "That's exactly why it matters," the CEO said. "You see people. Leadership needs that." He was stunned into silence. The CEO stood. "Walk with me." They left the meeting room and walked down the hallway, the city visible through the wide glass windows. "You don't understand yet," the CEO said softly. "But yesterday, when you played, it reminded me of something I lost, something steady, something true." He didn't know what to say. The CEO continued. "You may not want power. You may not want status. But sometimes the people who don't chase those things are the ones who deserve responsibility." They stopped near the end of the hallway. The CEO looked at him with a calm, unreadable expression. "I asked you to show me who you are, and today you did." He waited, heart thumping. The CEO's voice lowered. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you what comes next." The next morning carried a different kind of weight. It was the kind of feeling that sat quietly on his shoulders, reminding him that something important waited ahead. He woke earlier than usual, not because of fear, but because his mind simply refused to rest. The CEO's final words from the day before echoed in him like a soft drumbeat. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you what comes next." What came next? The phrase felt both thrilling and terrifying. He moved through his morning routine, slower than usual, trying not to let his thoughts race too far ahead. Whatever the CEO planned to say today, it would shift something in his life, maybe a little, maybe a lot. He couldn't tell. All he knew was that he had to walk into the day with an open mind. As he made his way to the office, the city felt more alive than usual. The morning crowd moved with purpose, the street vendors calling out, buses rumbling by, and the early sun casting long shadows along the pavement. He walked with his hands in his pockets, glancing up at the towering buildings around him. They looked the same as ever, but he didn't feel the same. When he reached the building, the lobby buzzed with more conversation than usual. A few people looked his way, not rudely, but with a kind of curious respect. He offered polite nods and kept moving, not wanting attention. As he passed the piano, he paused for a second. The sunlight hit its surface again just like the day before, and for a moment He imagined the keys under his fingers. But he shook thought away and headed toward the elevators. He reached his department and sat down at his desk. The usual noise filled the space keyboards clicking, quiet chatter, printers humming. It grounded him a little. He tried to work, but his thoughts drifted constantly to the meeting that would come later, about around mid-morning. His supervisor walked over with a calm smile. "The CEO asked me to tell you he wants to see you in his office at noon. Don't worry, it seems positive." He nodded, grateful for the reassurance. "Thank you." Noon. 3 hours. He could wait, but those 3 hours crawled slower than any workday he had ever experienced. When the clock finally approached noon, he stood, straightened his shirt, and took a deep breath. Then he headed toward the elevator. The ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, he stepped into the quiet hallway, bright with natural light. He walked until he reached the CEO's office, where the door stood half open. "Come in," the CEO's voice called. He stepped inside. The CEO sat at his desk, a few papers neatly stacked, a cup of coffee half finished. The room smelled faintly of fresh wood and something subtle, maybe a hint of citrus. The CEO gestured to the chair in front of him. "Sit." He did. For a moment, the CEO simply looked at him. Not in a harsh way, more like he was trying to see the person behind every layer. "You know," the CEO began, "it's rare to find someone who has presence without trying. Someone who influences a room without speaking. Yesterday proved you have that. And the day before. Well, you already know what that meant." He sat quietly, listening. The CEO continued, "I've been thinking a lot since the moment you played. About what it revealed. About what your calmness revealed during the meeting. And about what the company needs right now." His heart thumped harder. He wasn't sure where this was going. "I'm not here to offer you a title you're not ready for," the CEO said. "And I'm not here to make empty promises. But I am here to open a door." A door. He held his breath. The CEO leaned back slightly. "I want you to join a special development program. One designed for people who show leadership qualities, even if they don't come from expected places. It'll expose you to different areas of the company strategy, operations, team management, communication. And I will personally mentor you." He blinked, stunned. "Me?" "Yes, you," the CEO said simply. "You have something that can't be taught, and I think it deserves room to grow." He struggled for words. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," the CEO replied. "But I want you to think about what this could mean. Not just for your job, but for the kind of person you want to become." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. This wasn't a joke or exaggeration. This was real. The CEO stood and walked around to the other side of the desk. "Come with me," he said. They walked down the hallway until they reached a large window overlooking the city. The view stretched far buildings, roads, parks, small people moving like tiny dots. "This," the CEO said quietly, "is the view from responsibility. When you sit here, you don't just see buildings. You see thousands of people who look to this company to help shape their lives. Every decision echoes down to them." He stared out, feeling the weight of the words. "Most people want the view before they understand the responsibility," the CEO continued. "They want the power without the purpose. But you carry purpose even when no one is watching." The words sank deep into him. The CEO turned to him. "So here's what comes next. I want you to join the program. It won't be easy. You'll face challenges, pressure, unexpected moments. But I believe you can handle them. And I'll guide you through it." He swallowed hard. "Why me?" The CEO's answer came without a second thought. "Because you reminded me of what leadership should look like. You reminded me of something I forgot." The silence between them felt powerful. Finally, the CEO said, "Take the weekend to think about it. Give me your answer Monday morning." "I will," he said softly. The CEO nodded. "Good. Now go. And remember, this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more of who you already are." He left the office in a daze. The hallway felt longer, the elevator ride quieter, the lobby brighter. When he reached the piano again, he stopped. This time, he sat. He placed his hands gently on the keys, not to perform, not to impress, but simply to breathe. The soft melody filled the empty space, like sunlight settling across a floor. He played slowly, letting each note remind him of who he was before all this, before the challenge, before the conversations, before the unexpected turns. When he finished, he stood, feeling calm. He walked outside into the warm afternoon. The city noise wrapped around him, lively and familiar dot as he crossed the street. He felt something new rising inside him, not fear, not pressure, not possibility, that he thought about Monday morning, about the decision he would make, about the path that might open, whatever he chose. One thing was certain: he would never again underestimate the quiet moments that reveal who people truly are, and neither would the CEO. The story that began with a careless challenge had become something far bigger, something neither of them expected, yet something that would shape both their lives in ways they couldn't fully understand yet. What unfolded next wasn't shock, or surprise, or doubt. It was growth, and it was only the beginning. I remember that morning starting slow, almost too slow compared to everything that had been happening around us. The sun wasn't fully up yet, and the air felt cooler than usual. It was one of those moments where the world seems to take a breath before things pick up again. Everyone in the house was quiet, almost like each person was lost in their own thoughts. It was strange, because even though we had been through so much, that silence felt heavier than noise. Maybe it was because we all knew something was shifting. Not in a bad way, just in a way that none of us could fully explain. I sat near the window for a while, watching light creep over the rooftops. There was something calming about the way the sky changed colors, slow and steady, unlike everything else that kept rushing around us. After a few minutes, the others started moving around. No one said much. We didn't need to. Somehow, without words, we were all aware that the day ahead was important. Not dramatic or dangerous, just important in the quiet, subtle way life sometimes brings. When we finally stepped outside, the world looked different, though nothing had physically changed. Maybe it was us who had changed. I could feel this sense of responsibility, something that felt earned, not forced. And I could tell the others felt it too. We walked without rushing, almost like the day was guiding us forward at its own pace. The streets were waking up, with shops opening and people starting their morning routines. Simple things, but they reminded me that normal life still existed. Even after everything that had happened, we reached the place we had planned to meet. A small open area that we had chosen because it was quiet and out of the way. There was a bench near the corner, old and a bit uneven, but it worked for what we needed. The air smelled like fresh bread coming from the bakery nearby, and it somehow made everything feel a little lighter. We talked for a long time longer than we expected. There wasn't a single dramatic moment. No raised voices, no tension, no confusion. Just honest conversations about what we wanted, what we were afraid of, and how we wanted to move forward. Each person had something meaningful to say, and it surprised me how open everyone was. It felt like we had all reached a point where hiding our feelings didn't make sense anymore. As we talked, I noticed something that made me feel oddly proud. The way everyone spoke wasn't from fear or uncertainty anymore. It came from understanding of themselves, of each other, and of what we had become as a group. For the first time, it felt like we weren't just reacting to things happening around us. We were deciding things for ourselves. And that felt powerful. There was a moment where things got quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that shows everyone is thinking deeply. I looked around at the F,